Ethan blinked as the bright light of the transport chamber faded, revealing a place unlike anything he had ever seen. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the ground beneath his feet was smooth, almost like polished stone. He looked around, his heart pounding. Towering structures twisted toward the sky, curved in impossible shapes that seemed to defy gravity. It felt like stepping into a dream, or a nightmare. He was not alone. Around him, other humans stood frozen, eyes wide, whispering nervously. None of them understood how they had arrived here. One moment they had been on their own world, and the next they were inside a colossal building that seemed alive. Ethan tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The humans were being watched. He could feel it, though he could not see who or what was observing them. From high above, strange shapes moved silently. Ethan squinted. Shadows of enormous creatures passed along the walls. Their forms were unlike anything human imagination could create. Limbs stretched and bent in ways that should have been impossible. Yet there was no sense of malice, only curiosity. The humans were part of something much larger. A collection, an exhibit, a living display. This is a zoo?" whispered Mara, a woman standing beside him. Her voice trembled, though she tried to sound brave. Ethan did not answer. The word zoo seemed too small for the vastness of this place. It was more like a city, a museum, and a laboratory combined. The humans were guided, or rather herded, into a large enclosure. It was bright, almost cheerful, but sterile. The ground was smooth and featureless, the walls blank as if designed to highlight the humans themselves. No grass, no dirt, no sky. Ethan knelt and touched the floor, but it felt like cold plastic. He looked around at his fellow humans. Most of them moved cautiously, stepping lightly as if afraid to disturb something invisible. From a distance, devices hovered silently, scanning everything. Lights blinked in alien patterns, casting strange colors across the enclosure. Ethan noticed that the humans' every movement was being observed and recorded. He tried to catch the attention of one of the creatures watching from above, but it moved too quickly, disappearing behind a curve of the structure. He realized then that they were not just being watched, they were being studied. Every reaction, every gesture mattered to the beings observing them. Despite the fear, Ethan felt a spark of curiosity. He began to explore the edges of the enclosure. He noticed a small, shallow depression in one corner where the smooth floor dipped slightly. He poked it with his shoe, and for a moment nothing happened. But then he felt a faint warmth in his hand when he touched it. It was almost as if the floor itself had a pulse, a hidden life beneath the surface. Other humans started to gather around, examining the floor with cautious wonder. Someone laughed nervously. "Maybe they made this just for us," whispered one man. Ethan smiled faintly, though the unease did not leave him. He could sense that this place was much bigger than any cage or room humans had ever known. It was a stage, a living experiment, and they were its subjects. The towering shapes above them seemed to shift again. One of the creatures came closer, bending its long, thin form to look at the humans more carefully. Its skin shimmered in colors Ethan could not name. The eyes, or what he assumed were eyes, studied the humans with an intensity that made his stomach twist. But it did not attack. It only observed, fascinated by these small, strange beings that could laugh, cry, and touch. Ethan turned back to the other humans. Some were crying quietly. Others whispered prayers in languages he did not recognize. He held Mara's hand and tried to comfort her. "We have to be calm," he said softly, though he was not sure if he believed it himself. "They are watching. They want to know who we are." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. The humans were fed, given water, and allowed to move around, but always under observation. Ethan noticed that the air seemed to hum with energy, as if the enclosure itself was alive. Every sound echoed strangely, and shadows moved where no light source existed. For the first time, Ethan wondered if humans were truly the most remarkable beings here, or just one small species among countless others. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Yet, despite the fear, he felt a strange pride. They had arrived here, alone but alive, and somehow they were still standing. As night, or what passed for night in this alien place, approached, Ethan sat on the cold floor looking up at the vast shapes above. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if the beings observing them were kind or cruel. But deep inside he felt a quiet determination. Humans had survived against impossible odds before. Perhaps even in this cosmic zoo, they could find a way to leave their mark. And somewhere in the depths of the enclosure, hidden beneath the sterile floor, a small patch of dirt began to form, almost unnoticed. It was tiny, muddy, and ordinary, but it carried the faint promise that humans, no matter how small, could shape their world in ways even the Watchers could not predict. The next morning Ethan woke to a strange feeling. The enclosure no longer felt entirely empty. He rubbed his eyes and stepped forward. There, in the corner where he had poked the floor the day before, something had changed. A small patch of mud had appeared, dark and wet, as if the floor itself had decided to grow. He knelt and touched it with his fingers. The mud felt cool and soft, unlike the smooth plastic he remembered. Tiny green sprouts poked through the soil, fragile but alive. Ethan's eyes widened. He had never seen anything like it. The humans around him began to notice as well. Is that real?" whispered Mara, pointing at the patch. She stepped closer and let her fingers brush the damp soil. The plants wiggled slightly under her touch, almost as if they were breathing. Ethan looked around. The enclosure was still mostly bare, but this tiny patch of mud and life stood out like a jewel. Something about it felt familiar, comforting. Humans began to gather, stepping carefully to avoid disturbing it. Some laughed softly. Some were silent, staring in awe. Above them the Watchers shifted. The towering alien forms moved with sudden interest. Ethan could feel their presence more strongly than ever. It was as if the patch of mud had surprised even them. They had built this enclosure to observe humans, to study them in a sterile, controlled environment, yet the humans had somehow changed it. "Do you think it's our doing?" one man asked, kneeling beside the mud. Ethan shook his head. He did not know, but a thought filled him with wonder. Maybe humans were more powerful than anyone had realized. The humans began experimenting. Some collected small puddles of water with their hands, pouring it carefully over the sprouts. Others stacked tiny stones around the mud, making miniature walls and channels. A few even tried to plant scraps of seeds they found in their pockets. Every movement seemed to encourage growth. The mud seemed to respond, expanding slowly, spreading just a little farther across the cold floor. The aliens above had never recorded anything like this. Their devices scanned the patch, measuring, analyzing, but no known explanation fit. The soil, the water, the plants, all behaved in ways that should have been impossible. They were observing life that grew and adapted, seemingly in response to the humans themselves. Ethan watched a small group of children playing near the mud. They dug tiny holes, laughing when the water pooled and ran into the trenches they made. Even in captivity, humans could not help but create, imagine, and play. Ethan realized that this tiny patch of earth was more than just mud and plants. It was proof of human resilience. One of the aliens leaned closer, its long thin limbs bending in impossible angles. Its skin shimmered in colors that made Ethan's eyes hurt to look at. The creature's gaze was intense, analyzing everything, but it did not interfere. It seemed to be learning, perhaps even appreciating the human's ingenuity. Ethan felt a strange sense of pride. They were small, fragile, and entirely out of place in this cosmic zoo, yet they had made a mark. Even in an alien environment, humans could create, adapt, and inspire. He could feel the presence of the mud beneath his fingers, and in a strange way he understood it. Life responded to them even here, even under observation. Hours passed. The humans grew bolder. They used broken pieces of the enclosure's smooth walls to build tiny ramps and bridges over the muddy patch. They fashioned little gardens with stones and mud, planting scraps of organic matter they found. The tiny backyard, as Ethan had begun to think of it, seemed almost alive. The aliens continued to watch in silence. They had catalogued countless species across galaxies, but never had they seen one so small exert such influence over its environment. Humans were fragile, yes, but their creativity, persistence, and connection to life itself were extraordinary. Ethan sat on the edge of the patch, feeling the cool mud between his fingers. Mara sat beside him, smiling softly. "Do you think they understand?" she asked, nodding toward the Watchers above. Ethan shook his head. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe they're only beginning to." Evening came, or at least the closest the enclosure had to evening. The artificial lights dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the tiny backyard. Ethan watched the humans gather, laugh, and explore. Each small action seemed to feed the life in the mud, encouraging it to grow just a little bit more. Some of the children were asleep near the patch, curled up with small stones as pillows. Ethan smiled. Even here in captivity, humans found ways to connect to life, to nurture, to survive. That tiny, muddy corner had become more than a curiosity, it was proof of human spirit. Above them, the alien Watchers seemed almost thoughtful. They had built a zoo, controlled every variable, and yet the humans had found a way to change their world. The aliens had expected compliance, order, predictability, but humans brought creativity, unpredictability, and life itself. Ethan looked at the tiny plants and muddy soil, feeling a deep sense of connection. This was only the beginning. The enclosure was vast, the watchers endless, and the humans were small, but even here they could leave a mark. As night, or the closest approximation of it, fell, Ethan whispered softly to the mud, "We're not just visitors. We belong here somehow." And though he did not know if the watchers could hear him or if the soil could respond, he felt a quiet hope stir in his chest. The tiny backyard pulsed under his fingers, dark and muddy, fragile but alive. And somewhere deep in the cosmic zoo, the aliens began to understand that humans, small and simple, were far more remarkable than they had ever imagined. The next morning, Ethan woke to find the tiny backyard had grown overnight. The patch of mud had spread, reaching further across the smooth floor. The sprouts had grown taller and small, delicate leaves glimmered under the artificial lights. The humans gasped in wonder. Some knelt to touch the soft soil, amazed at how life seemed to respond to them. "It's alive," whispered Mara, kneeling beside Ethan. She let her fingers sink into the mud, careful not to damage the delicate plants. "It's like it's listening to us." Ethan nodded. "It's more than that. I think it's because we're here and we're human." The humans began to explore more boldly. They carried small stones and pieces of broken walls to create paths and bridges over the expanding mud. Some dug tiny channels to guide water, others stacked stones to form miniature fences. Children laughed as they ran their hands through the soil, spreading it carefully to make little hills and valleys. Even in captivity, humans could not help but create, imagine, and play. Above them, the alien watchers shifted with sudden interest. The enormous creatures bent their strange, elongated forms closer, eyes, or what Ethan assumed were eyes, focused on the humans. Machines hovered silently, scanning the soil and the plants, analyzing every movement. But the readings confused the aliens. Nothing in their database explained how life could flourish in such a controlled, artificial environment. One of the aliens extended a long, thin limb toward the patch of mud. Ethan froze, unsure if the creature would interfere. But instead of touching the humans, the alien touched the soil lightly, almost as if it were learning from them. The mud seemed to react, spreading slightly toward the alien's touch before retreating to the human's hands. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Humans were changing their world, even in ways the aliens had not predicted. Ethan walked among the humans, observing their work. A small boy had dug a tiny hole and planted a seed he had found in his pocket. He smiled proudly as the seedling sprouted immediately, bending toward the boy's hands. Ethan realized that humans were not just survivors, they were creators. Even in the smallest, most confined space, they could shape life itself. The aliens' fascination grew. They whispered to one another in sounds Ethan could not understand, pointing to the humans in their growing backyard. Some of the watchers began adjusting the enclosure, adding small lights or streams of water to see how the humans would respond. Ethan noticed that the humans instinctively adapted. They used the new streams to water the plants, building little reservoirs and channels. They laughed, experimented, and explored, never afraid to try new things. Ethan knelt beside Mara, watching as she placed tiny stones around a sprouting plant. "Look at them," she said softly, nodding toward the hovering watchers. "They think they control everything, but we're changing them. They're learning from us." Ethan smiled. "I think you're right. We're small, but we're alive. We leave marks wherever we go." The day passed slowly. The tiny backyard grew more complex, with miniature hills, small puddles, and patches of thriving plants. The humans began creating small shelters using stones and mud, mimicking the homes they remembered from Earth. Some built tiny fences, others dug little channels to guide water. Children ran through the mud, laughing, while adults carefully shaped the land. By evening, the aliens could no longer hide their astonishment. The humans were not just surviving, they were actively transforming the sterile environment into a miniature world of life and growth. Even the most experienced alien observers had never witnessed a species with such creativity and influence over its surroundings. Ethan sat beside the largest patch of mud, letting his fingers sink into the soil. He could feel the energy of life pulsing under his touch, responding to the humans' presence. He realized that they were doing something extraordinary. Even in captivity, even under constant observation, humans could create, nurture, and inspire. A small group of humans had gathered around a shallow pool of water that had formed in one corner. They experimented, digging channels and small dams, guiding the water to the plants. Children splashed gently, laughing when the water moved exactly as they intended. Ethan watched them and felt a quiet pride. Humans were small, yes, but their spirit was enormous. Above, one alien leaned closer, studying a child planting a seed. The creature's long limbs bent in ways that seemed impossible, and its shimmering skin reflected the light in strange patterns. The child looked up, smiling, unaware of the intensity of the gaze. Yet somehow the alien did not seem threatening. It was learning, observing, perhaps even admiring the human's ingenuity. Ethan turned to Mara. "Do you see that?" he asked. "Even they're impressed. Even they're learning from us." Mara nodded, her eyes bright. "I never thought being watched could feel proud." As night, or the closest approximation of it in the enclosure, fell, the humans rested around their tiny backyard. The mud glimmered softly under the artificial lights, full of life and growth. Ethan looked at the small hills, the puddles, the tiny plants, and the children laughing and playing. It was more than survival. It was creation. Above, the alien watchers whispered and moved in patterns Ethan could not understand. Machines hummed softly, scanning, recording, and analyzing. But no amount of data could explain what was happening. Humans were changing the world around them, not through force or technology, but simply by being themselves. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, pressing his hands into the mud. He could feel the heartbeat of life beneath him, small and fragile, yet unstoppable. This tiny backyard, muddy and imperfect, was proof of something greater. Humans, even tiny and confined, could leave a mark on the universe. And somewhere, high above, in the silent observation decks of the cosmic zoo, the aliens began to understand that humans were unlike any other species they had ever seen. They were small, yes, but they were extraordinary. By the next morning, the tiny backyard had grown even more. The mud stretched farther, covering patches of the smooth floor that had once been sterile. Small plants had sprouted everywhere, and tiny puddles reflected the artificial light above. The humans moved among it carefully, amazed at how life seemed to respond to them. Ethan knelt beside a small sapling, feeling its fragile leaves between his fingers. "It's incredible," he whispered. "Even in a place like this, we can make something grow." Mara sat beside him, touching the mud softly. "It's like we're part of it. The mud, the plants, they're alive with us." Above, the alien watchers leaned closer, their long, shimmering limbs stretching over the enclosure. Their glowing eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, focused on every movement. The devices hovering nearby recorded data faster than Ethan could comprehend, scanning the soil, the plants, the water, even the humans themselves. But nothing matched what the aliens were seeing. The mud and plants were spreading on their own. The humans touched it, shaped it, played in it, but even where no human stepped, the tiny backyard seemed to grow. The watchers whispered in their alien language, confusion and astonishment mixing in tones Ethan could feel but not hear. "Do you see that?" Ethan said, pointing to a small area where plants were pushing through the floor. "It's moving on its own. Almost like it wants to grow." A young boy ran through the muddy paths, laughing as water splashed around him. The humans had begun to experiment with the backyard, building little walls, digging channels, and planting seeds. Every action seemed to encourage life, and the humans laughed at the strange magic of it all. Above, one alien leaned closer than ever before, its long limbs hovering over the humans. Ethan could feel its attention like a weight in the air. The creature bent its head, tilting it curiously, as if trying to understand how such small beings could affect so much. Machines scanned again and again, but the readings made no sense. Humans were altering their environment naturally, without tools, without knowledge of science, yet perfectly, subtly, and deliberately. Ethan turned to Mara. "Do you think they understand now? That we're more than they thought?" Mara nodded slowly. "I think they're realizing something. They didn't expect us to do this." The humans continued working. A group of adults built a tiny bridge of stones over a puddle, while children dug little channels to carry water to thirsty plants. One woman planted a seed she had found in her pocket, and it sprouted immediately, bending toward her hands as if reaching for them. Ethan smiled. Humans were fragile, yes, but they could create and shape life in ways nothing else could. The alien watchers began to adjust the environment, adding small lights and streams of water to see how humans would respond. Ethan noticed the humans adapted instantly. They guided the water carefully through the mud, feeding the plants, and laughing when the streams flowed exactly as they wanted. Even in captivity, humans were creators. One alien whispered to another, a series of musical tones that Ethan could only imagine as conversation. They pointed to the humans in the growing backyard, their movements quick and sharp. It was clear the aliens were beginning to understand. Humans were not just fragile creatures to observe, they were remarkable, capable of influencing their environment in ways the aliens had never predicted. Ethan knelt beside the largest patch of mud. He pressed his hands into it, feeling the cool, damp earth under his fingers. Life pulsed there, small but steady, alive in a way the sterile enclosure never had been before. He realized that humans were not just surviving, they were creating. And even in the most confined space, even under the watchful eyes of beings far older and wiser, humans could leave a mark. Mara knelt beside him, smiling softly. "They're learning from us," she said. "Even they can't ignore it." Ethan nodded. "Yes. We're small, yes, but our spirit, it's bigger than they can imagine." The humans continued to play, experiment, and explore the tiny backyard. They built little hills, dug channels for water, stacked stones to protect fragile plants, and planted every scrap of seed they could find. The environment responded, spreading life even where humans had not touched. It was as if the enclosure itself had come alive, guided by human presence. The alien watchers shifted closer, fascinated. They had seen countless species across galaxies, but never one with this combination of creativity, adaptability, and subtle influence. Humans did not need tools or technology to shape their world. They did it with hands, imagination, and spirit. As night, or the closest approximation in the artificial enclosure, fell, Ethan sat quietly, his fingers in the mud. Children slept nearby, curled up beside puddles or small stone walls they had built. Mara rested her head on his shoulder, smiling softly. The tiny backyard glowed faintly under the artificial light, dark and muddy, fragile yet full of life. Ethan could feel the pulse of it, and he understood something profound. Humans, even confined and observed, could leave a mark on the world. They were small, yes, but unstoppable in their creativity and spirit. Above them, the alien watchers continued to study in silence. They whispered, scanned, and observed, but even their immense knowledge could not explain what was happening. Humans were extraordinary, not in size, not in strength, but in their ability to adapt, create, and transform. Ethan smiled to himself, pressing his hands into the mud one last time before resting. The tiny backyard, muddy and imperfect, had become more than a patch of soil. It was proof. Proof that humans, no matter how small, could shape the universe around them simply by being themselves. And somewhere high above, in the observation decks of the cosmic zoo, the aliens began to truly understand that humans were unlike any other species they had catalogued. Small, yes, but remarkable, unstoppable, and full of life. By the next day, the tiny backyard had become something extraordinary. The mud stretched across most of the enclosure, dotted with puddles, small hills, and thriving plants. Tiny streams ran through channels dug by human hands, carrying water to thirsty sprouts. Ethan looked around in awe. The humans had created a small living world within the sterile walls of the cosmic zoo. Children ran through the muddy paths, laughing and splashing, while adults shaped the land with care. Stones were stacked into miniature bridges, small walls protected the plants, and even scraps of found seeds had sprouted. It was messy, imperfect, and alive, and it was theirs. Ethan knelt by the largest puddle, letting his fingers sink into the cool, wet mud. He smiled. "Look at this," he said softly to Mara, who knelt beside him. "Even here we can make something beautiful. Even here we leave our mark." Mara touched the soil gently. "It's more than that. It's alive because we're alive. It listens to us, grows with us. It's us." Above, the alien watchers were no longer hiding their fascination. Their enormous forms bent closer, long limbs curving over the enclosure, shimmering in colors that made the humans' eyes widen. Devices hovered and scanned, recording every movement, every ripple in the mud, every leaf that bent toward human hands. The aliens whispered in their alien language, pointing to the humans' work. They had never seen anything like this. One of the watchers leaned closer, touching the edge of the muddy patch. Instantly, the mud seemed to expand toward the aliens' touch, then retreat back toward the humans. Ethan felt a thrill run through him. Humans were not only surviving, they were shaping their world. Even beings as ancient and powerful as these aliens could not fully control or predict the humans' influence. Children laughed as they poured water into tiny channels they had dug, guiding it carefully to thirsty plants. Adults worked alongside them, building bridges over puddles and arranging stones to protect delicate sprouts. Every action seemed to encourage the growth of the tiny backyard. It was as if life itself responded to human creativity, resilience, and care. Ethan stood and looked at the other humans. They were small, fragile, and out of place in this enormous cosmic zoo, but they had created something extraordinary. Even here, confined and watched, humans had transformed a sterile, controlled environment into a living, breathing world. Mara looked up at the towering watchers. "Do you think they understand?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Maybe. Or maybe they're only beginning to. But it doesn't matter. We've done it. We've made something alive. "We've left a mark." The aliens whispered and moved above, clearly astonished. They had catalogued countless species across galaxies, but never one capable of such creativity and subtle influence. Humans did not need advanced technology to change the world, they used their hands, their minds, their spirit. Ethan knelt again, pressing his hands into the soft mud. He could feel life pulsing beneath him, small and fragile yet unstoppable. The tiny backyard had become more than a patch of dirt and puddles. It was proof. Proof that humans, no matter how confined, no matter how small, could shape life around them simply by being alive. The humans began to gather near the largest hill they had built, watching as the mud, plants, and water continued to move and grow. Children sat quietly, mesmerized by the life around them. Even the youngest seemed to understand something instinctive, that life could be nurtured, created, and protected, even in the strangest of places. Above, the alien watchers leaned closer still. Their long limbs shimmered with light, and their glowing eyes focused on the humans in wonder. For the first time it seemed the aliens were not just observing, they were learning. Humans had become teachers without knowing it, showing that life, creation, and spirit could not be controlled, only inspired. Ethan turned to Mara and whispered, "We're small, yes. But we're stronger than they can imagine. Even in this cosmic zoo we matter. Even here we can make life grow." Mara smiled, her fingers brushing the wet mud. "It's more than we thought possible. We're not just surviving. We're alive. And we're leaving our mark." The tiny backyard stretched before them, muddy, imperfect, and full of life. Streams flowed, plants bent toward human hands, and the soil seemed to pulse with energy. It was a small corner of Earth in the heart of a cosmic zoo, yet it carried something far greater than its size, proof of human resilience, creativity, and spirit. Ethan sat quietly watching the humans around him. They laughed, played, created, and nurtured. They were small, yes, and fragile, but their spirit was enormous. The tiny backyard had become a symbol, a testament to what humans could do even in the harshest, strangest conditions. Above, the alien watchers whispered and scanned, still trying to understand. Some seemed to bow slightly, acknowledging what they had witnessed. Humans had done something extraordinary, they had changed their world, even in captivity. They had left a mark that could not be erased. Ethan looked at the muddy soil, feeling a quiet pride. This tiny backyard was proof that humans were remarkable. They were small, fragile, and easily overlooked, yet their creativity, determination, and spirit could shape life itself. As the artificial lights dimmed to signal the end of the day, Ethan pressed his hands into the mud one last time. He smiled. The tiny backyard, dark and muddy, fragile yet alive, was theirs. And somewhere in the cosmic zoo, the alien watchers finally understood. Humans, small as they were, could leave a mark on the universe that no force, no cage could ever erase.